Yeah, thank you for the introduction. So my name is Julia Gonski. I am a postdoc at Columbia University. I actually work on the ATLAS experiment, but I'm here in my capacity as the early career member of the DPF Executive Committee for 2021 and 2022. And I just would say up front that even as an experimentalist, it's been really cool to hear this snapshot of work that's happening in the theory frontier and organizing for the Snowmass process. And I think it's a great example of how these ideas can cross-pollinate across frontiers in the course of doing a process like this. So I really hope to see more of that coming in the next couple of months, and I think we should have a good ramp up to the summer study with this ongoing dialogue. But so I'll start in true physics seminar fashion by motivating what I'm going to talk about. And so I won't really motivate the Snowmass process because, of course, you guys are all here. So I think there are motivations enough for participating in the process. But I want to make one point in particular. So this is a quote that I took from the snowmass21.org Twiki. And the highlight here is that Snowmass will define the most important questions for physics and opportunities to address them. And then there's the P5 panel that is aiming to develop a strategic plan for US HEP that can be executed over a 10-year timescale in the context of a 20-year global vision. And I want to emphasize really the timeline part of this because something like a 10 or a 20-year timescale could become the tenure case for someone who is a graduate student right now. And I think that underlines the importance of having the early career community in this discussion. And I think there are three key areas where we should be thinking about involving early career people in this process. Number one, of course, is the actual doing of the physics. That's really the core thing that we want to deliver with Snowmass. That includes the generation of the ideas, performing the studies, writing the white papers, all the deliverables that will go into the final report in July, or from July to October. Additionally, the idea that we are building a community that will be inherited by the people who are early career physicists right now, and that we should be working to discuss these issues and topics that are relevant to the early career community in such a way that we can kind of sculpt our community to be hospitable and to be a nice landing place for that community in some amount of time. And then also as an educational experience. I think I've personally already learned a lot from Snowmass outside of my typical work topics, doing studies on additional things for future colliders, for example, in my side. And I think that that's generally a nice thing to remember, that we also want to make sure that we are training students and postdocs to make sure that we can develop the field in the most promising way. And there's a lot of opportunity there from an educational standpoint here. So overview of Snowmass early career. What this group generally is early career physicists brought together by the Snowmass process. 10 years ago, this was referred to as Snowmass Young for people who are around for that period. So we've sort of migrated and changed the definition of early career ever so slightly. And this is building on a huge amount of interest that came up during the original call for early career involvement in creating the Snowmass Young when Snowmass was first launched in 2020. And now I want to give the working definition of early career that we're using is anyone who is within about 10 years from their highest degree. So that's not a hard guideline. I typically say that if you believe that you are early career, you probably are. So we're not trying to give an exclusive definition of this. And we want to account for the fact that there are pauses in careers and different types of pathways, different levels of terminal degree, for example. So it's a rough working definition. And after that huge original call, we realized that in line with the purposes that I gave up front of what we want early career people to be doing in the process, there were really two independent efforts that we wanted to push simultaneously in Snowmass early career. One of them, of course, is Snowmass coordination, where we have early career liaisons to different frontiers, managing things on the physics side of the effort. And then we also have what we call our core initiatives. So this is kind of migrated away from the Snowmass process and really just capitalizing on the infrastructure of having all these people together that didn't ordinarily get to interact. And these are covering these early career issues and different ways to address those in the high energy physics and astrophysics community, even going forward beyond the Snowmass process. So I'll talk about both of these in specifics. Starting with the Snowmass early career coordination side. So as I mentioned, this is a liaison structure between early career physicists and the topical groups or the frontier conveners. We have about 1 to 2 early career liaisons for each frontier. The procedure for each frontier of who the liaison is as a function of time does differ a bit because the different frontiers have different amounts of interest or philosophies on who to elect and how to organize this. So I do have a list there. It's a spreadsheet to who our current liaisons are, current and past liaisons. If you're looking for someone on the early career side to contact, that's where I would point you to investigate. And the general purpose of this was to, of course, engage the early career members with physics activities, liaise with the frontier leadership, and that liaison goes in both directions. So communicating taking the pulse of the early career community in that frontier and passing it on to the senior leadership, and then also disseminating key information from senior leadership down to early career people who are doing physics work or who are less tightly involved with the technicalities of the Snowmass process. And then there's also another spreadsheet that I want to point out that has been really useful. This has been maintained by Snowmass early career leadership, which is a list of early career LOIs. So LOIs that it's a just sort of crowdsourced spreadsheet. If you are an early career and you're working on a LOI or a white paper, you can just submit it to this database. I did scope it before this talk to see who in the theory frontier was working on it. I realize these links, I don't know if these slides will be published, but I can certainly share the links if people are interested to find them somewhere else. And then I'll move into the core initiatives. So there were 4 of these that emerged as their sort of own subdivisions of work in this side. There was a survey that was put out. I'll give a couple more details on that. Diversity, equity, inclusion issues, in-reach, so engaging within the early career community into the process. And then the idea of migrating all of this effort into a long-term organization. So I mentioned this notion of taking all this enthusiasm and not letting it just drop off the minute the summer study happens, really trying to segue this into something that can be an advisory committee over a longer period of time that is representative of the early career community in a bunch of these broad fields. And so the purpose of this, I think I've kind of mentioned these verbally already, really working on a cross-frontier connectivity aspect of the Snowmass community, advertising resources that come up, making recommendations to topical group or frontier conveners as needed on issues that are relevant for early career people. And then, of course, segueing this into the long-term cross-subfield structure. And we even like to imagine that this will help us be prepared for the next Snowmass process. So it was quite a bit of effort to build all this organization in 2020. And it would be nice if there was some continuity of, lessons learned and experience over that 10-year period for the next process. So some quick highlights from what has been accomplished on the core initiative side. I mentioned I would give more details on the survey. So this covered a variety of different topics, some related to physics, physics outlook and career prospects, but also general features of the community, like workplace culture, visa policies, and a lot more things. This was a survey for not just early career people, but the entire field, just taking the temperature of many different issues there. This was closed in August, and there is work to synthesize the results in time for this process. And then I want to also flash advertise, there's a new survey from the Snowmass Particle Physics Education Group. Again, if you get a hold of the links, it would be great to investigate that. On the DEI side, our DEI early career members have organized town halls in parallel with or in collaboration with the Community Engagement Frontier. There were a couple of them in 2021, focusing, you can see the names of these topics here, mentor-mentee relationships and supporting early career people in academia. So really topical and timely for these kinds of discussions. InReach, the main activity of InReach was this really awesome Big Questions in Physics colloquium series that has been, there's been a bunch of different topics that have iterated on this. They've been really well attended, very successful. So I think these are really exciting. You can see a list of the topics that we've had so far there. And that kind of brings me to the beginning of the conversation about the long-term organization. So we've chatted a bit with APS about where exactly we want this to land, how we want the leadership to be chosen, and how we want it to interface to the existing organizations in HEP. And we're still sort of settling the details on that. There was an LOI submitted on this in the very beginning, the very early call in the Community Engagement Frontier, and there will be a white paper on the topic. But I want to connect this to these InReach Big Questions colloquia, because I think that is looking like it will be a nice skeleton for what this organization can provide. So AAS has this head spotlight seminar series, if some folks are familiar. So this can be a really nice way to either cover topics that are really relevant to the early career community, and there's some desire to have more information on them, or to spotlight early career people, give them talk experience, a little bit more visibility, and have that really valuable network for senior people to look for good students and postdocs to hire, but also for the students and postdocs to find the subsequent jobs and so on. So that could be a really nice thing that we hope to continue with this LTO after the Snowmass process. So of course, going back to the motivation here, I think this is a why get involved that I think is geared both towards why early career people still have the opportunity to get involved and should, but also why some of the more senior people should encourage their early career people in their groups to get involved. I mentioned the idea of learning more physics, learning about topics beyond your thesis or your primary work, which I think is really valuable towards building a broader research program, a more mature research program as you're evolving in your career. Generally getting things on resumes. I think there are a lot of Snowmass workshops and papers and chances to advertise your work, getting those visibilities and fleshing out the CV. And also the process of reviewing a Snowmass white paper, which is sort of its own experience that is good professionally. And the networking aspect of this. I say to a lot of early career people that the entire US community in a bunch of different fields is here paying attention to this. And again, I think that this networking can go in both directions, people that are looking to hire and people that are looking for jobs. There's a really nice meeting of the minds that can happen through generally bringing more early career people in. And I think that there is still time to get involved. There's still room to eke out white papers before March 15th. And then of course, looking towards bringing more early career voices to the actual summer study. So I mentioned that I looked quickly for the early career LOIs from theorists, just to give a quick advertisement to people that have been working really hard in this frontier. We've already heard a lot of really great talks on this, so I'll very quickly just give some highlights. What I think was particularly cool when I was making this slide is that I realized just how much the early career theorists are involved in all of the other frontiers. So it goes back to Tao's point that we heard first thing in the morning, that theory kind of pervades all of the other things that we're trying to do in Snowmass. So early career members are involved in LOIs on at least 8 of the theory frontier subgroups, so good diversity there. And then the EC members of the theory frontier are cross liaisons to a lot of other frontiers. So a lot of these LOIs are cross-listed with neutrinos, cosmics, rare processes, computational frontier. And I think that's a nice example of just how far-reaching this work is. And then we just heard from Gilly, and I wanted to flash that white paper. It's a nice example of a solicited white paper where all of the contributors are within 10 years of their PhD and actually based at institutions outside the US. So I think that's another really nice point of how this process is reaching beyond the US app community to even the international context, and how bringing in early career voices like that can be a good way to facilitate the international involvement. So this brings me to the conclusions. It's been really inspiring for me to work with the early career people that want to be involved in Snowmass and seeing just how much enthusiasm there is for doing this planning. It's a really incredible, motivated group of people connecting both to the frontiers to make sure that early career people are involved on the physics level, and then also this core initiative side that I think also deserves some airtime in discussing some of these community-based issues as well. I would hope that people pay attention to this long-term organization. If there are any ideas on that, I'd be really happy to hear them, if there's goals for what that could serve, or if you want to be involved, of course. And then all of the different ways that you can get involved, documentation, various different Slack channels. There's a Welcome to Snowmass channel where you'll be directed to any of the other sub-core initiatives, or just generally in contact with EC leadership if you're interested. And then I also wanted to advertise the Theory Frontier early career contacts who I've been in quite a bit of touch with over the past couple of weeks putting all this together. And so I, again, would encourage you to reach out to them if you have Theory Frontier specific questions. Thanks.
Thanks, Julia, for this very nice talk. Questions or thoughts for her? Yeah.
So a lot of the motivation that you mentioned for getting involved were kind of fringe or secondary things, like, improving your Rolodex or getting contacts or something. Are there real, honest, professional reasons to get involved in Snowmass? It's a 2-year process. Postdocs last 3 years. Is it better to just hunker down and do research and write a bunch of papers, or will the community actually, when they review your application, say, oh, this person was very much involved in Snowmass, and look at it differently?
So that last thing you said, I think, is really the crucial part. I think that I've been underlining these secondary aspects because, of course, the trick with early career involvement is that everyone is on a temporary contract for the most part, and mostly considering I have such a small amount of time to put myself in the right lane to get the next permanent job. I personally, my view is that we should be incentivizing this kind of work, because this kind of work is critical to our field progressing. And the best way to incentivize that kind of work is to make it a good part of the job applicant review process. And I do think that, I mean, again, I mentioned my own Snowmass work, I think has been really expansive for me and just learning beyond what I'm doing, which I think is also valuable to planning a longer term faculty research plan. So I do think there are good motivations for why this can actually help even in the job application process as it stands, but it would also be great to see some consideration of Snowmass work being taken into account in interviews and selecting candidates.
Other questions, especially something quick from Zoom, if there is. Oh,
I actually have a very quick question, which is, can we have people who are asking questions identify themselves, especially if they're in the room, because as a remote participant, I don't know who just asked that question.
Sorry, Ruth, that was me, Andrew Larkowski.
Thank you.
Hi, Ruth. This is Tao Han. I have a question for you, Julia. Thank you very much for the tremendous effort and also the early career leaders to contribute to the Snowmass process. I have a question about this, the long-term organization. I think that's very important. It's a great idea. Snowmass process per se would conclude, so before the end of the year, but the physics impact will continue. So therefore, I think the organization, the long-term organization would be very, very important to carry on to connect people and train people. Do you have any comments along this line? What's the thinking for this long-term organization?
Yeah, so I would be happy to talk about that more at length. I think that the decisions that we have to come to in the short term, maybe while the Snowmass process still exists, is where, if and how we want that long-term organization to formally live. So do we really want to be completely independent as an organization, self-select leadership with our own kind of independent constitution, so to speak? Or are there options to integrate this group in some capacity within DPF or within APS and have some formal liaising structure there? So we had thrown around the idea of a early career advisory committee, something like this. We know that we have an ethics advisory committee, both at the APS level and at the DPF level, that is a resource that you can just consult if you have questions about certain ethical issues. And I think that we could consider a similar thing related to early career issues to be really valuable, because we have seen, I mean, I've personally seen a pretty significant uptick in how much there is a discussion about how to involve early career folks and how to support them and make sure resources are being devoted. So I think that this could be of value at the DPF level as well.
I guess we are running slightly out of time. It might be worth continuing this discussion. Oh, sorry. Yeah, please go ahead. So,
do we still have time, or
maybe something for really quick, because we're
okay.
A few minutes over time.
Yeah. So yeah, hi everyone. This is Aida. So I just want to ask: is it beneficial for us to have some survey or kind of more discussion regarding to address maybe difficulties for early career theories, because this is a theory kind of discussion. So just a question for you and for the general people: is this something that would be useful for everybody? Yeah, thanks.
I mean, I would absolutely say that if the theory community thinks that that would be valuable to collect those opinions, certainly, and I can connect you with the people that ran our survey to help organizationally. I also wonder if there must be some designation of frontier in that survey, and so you may even be able to slice the results of what we already have. So we can chat offline to see what might work best for that purpose.
All right. I don't see any other questions from this room, and also don't see anything on Zoom yet. Since we are slightly out of time, so let's take a moment to thank Julia for the nice talks.